A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You know, Herman, I was looking at some of those cybersecurity forums the other day, and it is absolutely amazing how much the conversation still centers on tools. Everyone wants to talk about the latest exploit, the newest version of some penetration testing suite, or how to use specific scripts in Kali Linux. It feels like we have this collective obsession with the digital lockpick while completely ignoring the fact that the person holding the keys is usually just going to hand them over if you ask the right way. We spend billions on firewalls and zero-day detection, but we treat the human element like an afterthought, or worse, a nuisance.
Herman Poppleberry here, and you are exactly right, Corn. It is what I call the Hollywood version of hacking. People want to see green text scrolling down a screen and someone wearing a hoodie in a dark room typing furiously to bypass a mainframe. But the reality of modern high-level breaches is much more corporate, much more patient, and frankly, much more effective. Our housemate Daniel actually sent us a prompt about this very thing. He wanted us to move past the simple phishing tropes and the technical toolkits like the Social Engineering Toolkit, or SET, to look at what social engineering actually looks like in 2026. It is not just a hack, Corn. It is a business process optimization for attackers. They are not looking for a hole in the code. They are looking for a hole in the culture.
That is an interesting way to frame it. A business process. When Daniel sent this over, it got me thinking about how we treat social engineering like it is some kind of outlier or a freak occurrence. We call it user error, which feels almost dismissive. It is like saying a bridge collapsed because of driver error when the bridge was actually designed to fail if a single car hit a pothole. If 74% of breaches involve a human element, as the 2025 Verizon Data Breach Investigations report pointed out, then it is not an outlier. It is the primary attack surface. It is the front door that we keep leaving unlocked while we install triple-pane reinforced glass on the windows.
Precisely. And when we talk about it being a business process, we have to look at how professional these groups have become. They have departments, they have research teams, they have quality assurance. They are not just sending out 1 million emails and hoping for one click anymore. That still happens, of course. The spray and pray model is alive and well for low-level credential harvesting. But the high-value targets, the ones that result in 9-figure losses or the theft of proprietary trade secrets, those are sophisticated, multi-stage psychological operations. They involve deep research, long-term grooming, and a clinical understanding of organizational psychology. They are exploiting the way humans are wired to interact.
So, let us start by defining the scope here. If we are moving beyond the Nigerian prince or the fake package delivery text that everyone recognizes now, what is the actual definition of social engineering in a modern professional environment? How do we categorize this for someone who thinks they are too smart to be fooled?
I like to define it as human layer protocol exploitation. In networking, we have protocols like TCP or HTTP that define how two machines talk to each other. They have handshakes, they verify identities, they exchange data in a specific order. Humans have protocols too. We have social norms, professional hierarchies, and ingrained responses to authority, urgency, or even just politeness. Social engineering is simply identifying a flaw in those human protocols and exploiting it to gain unauthorized access. It is layer 8 of the OSI model, Corn, the human layer. And just like a buffer overflow exploits a flaw in how a program handles memory, a social engineer exploits a flaw in how a human handles information and trust.
Human layer protocol exploitation. That sounds much more clinical and, honestly, more accurate. It takes the blame away from the individual and puts the focus on the system. So, if I am an attacker, I am not looking for a vulnerability in your firewall first. I am looking for a vulnerability in how your company onboarded its last 3 vendors, or how your IT department handles password resets on a Friday afternoon.
And the first step in that process is something most people do not even realize is happening to them. It is the open source intelligence phase, or OSINT. This is where the attacker maps out the target with terrifying precision. And they are not using some secret spy satellite Corn. They are using LinkedIn. They are using GitHub commit histories. They are looking at your company's public-facing job postings. They are even looking at the background of photos posted on Instagram from the office holiday party to see what kind of badges people wear or what brand of monitors are on the desks.
Right, because a job posting for a senior network engineer might list every single piece of hardware and software the company uses. It tells the attacker exactly what environment they are going to be walking into. If I see you are looking for someone with 10 years of experience in a specific legacy database and a very particular version of a cloud security gateway, I already know your technical stack better than some of your employees do.
It is a roadmap. If I see that posting, I know exactly which exploits to prepare. Then I go to LinkedIn. I find the people who work in that department. I see who they report to. I see who their peers are. I look for the new hires. New hires are gold, corn. They are eager to please, they are often overwhelmed, and they do not know the internal culture well enough to spot an anomaly yet. If I call a new hire and pretend to be from the executive suite, they are much less likely to push back than a 20-year veteran who knows the CEO personally.
And then you have the GitHub angle. I remember we touched on this in a previous episode about digital footprints. If a developer accidentally pushes a bit of code that includes a comment about an internal server naming convention, or even worse, a hard-coded credential, they have just handed over the keys to the kingdom. But even without the credentials, just knowing the naming convention for your internal servers makes an attacker's spoofed email look 10 times more legitimate. If an email references a server named PROD-DB049er, instead of just saying the database, it bypasses the brain's natural skepticism.
It builds that baseline of trust. And that leads into what we call high-value target grooming. This is where the shift from mass phishing to precision targeting really happens. Instead of a generic email, the attacker might spend weeks building a persona. They might interact with the target on professional forums, comment on their LinkedIn posts, or even send a few harmless emails first that require no action. They are establishing a pattern of normalcy. They want to become a familiar name in the target's inbox.
It is the long con. It is much more like traditional espionage than what we think of as cybercrime, but it is happening at scale now because of how much information we all put online. I think about that triad you always talk about, Armand. Authority, urgency, and scarcity. How do those play out in a modern SaaS workflow where everyone is already moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour?
Oh, those are the 3 pillars of a successful social engineering attack, and they are more effective now than ever because our cognitive load is so high. Let us look at authority first. We are socially conditioned to follow instructions from people above us in the hierarchy. If you get an email from the chief executive officer asking for a quick favor, your brain often skips the verification step because the social pressure to comply is so high. You do not want to be the person who told the CEO no, or the person who looked incompetent by asking, "Are you sure this is you?"
But it is not just the CEO anymore. It is the IT help desk. That is a huge one. We actually talked about the vulnerabilities of identity verification back in episode 958 when we were deconstructing why two-factor authentication is not a silver bullet. If someone calls you claiming to be from the help desk, they are assuming a position of technical authority. They are the experts, and you are the user who needs help. That dynamic immediately puts the attacker in control of the conversation.
And they combine that with urgency. That is the second pillar. They will say something like, "We have detected a security breach on your account, and we need to reset your credentials immediately, or you will be locked out of the system for 48 hours, which will delay the quarterly filing." Now you are panicked. You are not thinking about the protocol, you are thinking about the consequence of not acting. Urgency shuts down the analytical part of the brain and triggers the fight or flight response. You just want the problem to go away.
And scarcity is the third one. In a corporate context, that might be a limited window to sign up for a new benefit, a one-time offer for a training session, or even a limited number of spots for a high-profile project. It forces a quick decision. When you combine those three, authority, urgency, and scarcity, you create a psychological environment where the victim feels they must act now, and they must act without questioning the source. It is a perfect storm for a human layer exploit.
Let us look at a real-world scenario that has been incredibly effective lately, especially in early 2026. It is the help desk impersonation attack, specifically designed to bypass multi-factor authentication. An attacker calls an employee. They have already done their OSINT, so they know the employee's name, their manager's name, and their job title. They might even know what project they are working on because they saw a public tweet about it. They call and say, "Hey, this is Steve from IT. We are seeing some weird login attempts on your account from an IP address in a different country. We need to verify your identity to block these attempts."
And the employee, who is probably busy and now a little worried, says, "Okay, what do I need to do? I do not want my account compromised."
The attacker says, "I'm going to send a push notification to your phone. Just hit approve so I can verify it is you and I can lock down the account." This is what we call MFA fatigue. The attacker has been spamming the employee with push notifications for the last 10 minutes, and the employee is just relieved that someone from IT is finally calling to fix it. They hit approve, and the attacker is in. They did not need to crack a password. They did not need to find a zero-day exploit. They just needed to exploit the human desire to resolve a stressful situation and the technical authority they projected.
It is brilliant in a terrifying way. It turns our security measures against us. The push notification, which is supposed to be the final line of defense, becomes the very tool the attacker uses to gain entry. And because the employee thinks they are talking to a legitimate authority figure, they do not even realize they have been breached until much later, if ever. They think they hoped IT saved the company.
And that is just the entry point. Once they are in, they do not just stop there, they move laterally. This is where social engineering facilitates the technical side of the attack. Once I have access to one person's email, I can see their calendar. I can see who they have meetings with. I can see the tone of their conversations. Do they use emojis? Do they start emails with hey or hi? Now, when I email their boss or their colleague, I am not just spoofing an address. I am using the actual account, and I am mimicking the actual writing style. This is the ultimate insider threat, because the insider does not even know they are part of the attack.
That brings up a huge point about AI, Herman. Back in episode 593, we talked about how AI scales digital deception. We are seeing this manifest now in 2026 with things like business email compromise and voice cloning. I saw a report from January of this year about a massive surge in AI voice cloning being used in corporate finance departments. It is not just about a well-written email anymore. It is about a phone call that sounds exactly like your boss.
It is a game changer, Corn. It used to be that you could spot a phishing attempt by the bad grammar, the generic greeting, or the slightly off-kilter tone. But now, an attacker can feed a few dozen emails from a target into a large language model and generate a perfectly phrased request that sounds exactly like that person. And with voice cloning, they only need about 30 seconds of audio, which they can get from a YouTube video of a keynote speech or a podcast to clone a voice. If you hear your boss's voice on the phone telling you to authorize an emergency wire transfer to a new vendor because of a supply chain crisis, how many people are actually going to say no?
Very few, unless there is a rigid non-human process in place to prevent it. This is why I think the term user error is so damaging. It implies that if we just trained people better, the problem would go away. But you cannot train away the human response to hearing your boss's voice in an emergency. That is a physiological response. Your heart rate goes up, your focus narrows, and you want to comply. That is not a failure of intelligence. It is a failure of system design.
It is a systemic architectural flaw. If your security relies on a human being never being tricked, you have a broken system. It is like building a bridge and saying it will only stay up as long as no one drives a heavy truck over it. You have to assume the heavy truck is coming. You have to assume the social engineer will be successful at some point. A resilient system assumes the human will be fooled and builds checks and balances that do not rely on human intuition.
So if we move past the user error narrative, what does a structural defense actually look like? If we know that these attacks are going to happen and that they are going to be sophisticated, how do we build an organization that can withstand them? How do we move from being a soft target to a hard target?
The first step is moving from what I call security awareness training to process-based security. Most companies do these annual training sessions where they show you a fake phishing email and tell you to look for the typos or hover over the link. It is a waste of time in 2026 because the attackers do not make typos anymore. Instead, you need to build processes where the identity of the person making the request does not matter.
Give me a concrete example of that. How does that look in a real office?
Okay, let us take the wire transfer scenario, which is the classic business email compromise. Instead of relying on an email or a phone call, the process should be that any transfer over a certain amount, say $5,000, requires out-of-band verification through a specific, pre-approved channel that is not the one the request came in on. If the request comes via email, you must call a verified number already on file. If it comes via a phone call, you must verify it via a secure internal messaging system with a second approver. It does not matter if the CEO calls you and screams at you, the system literally will not allow the transfer without those steps. You are taking the social pressure off the individual and putting the burden on the process.
I like that. It gives the employee an out. They can say, I would love to help you, boss, but the system physically will not let me do it without these 3 other steps. It turns the process into the authority figure. It protects the employee from the psychological pressure of the hierarchy.
And you have to apply that to everything. Help desk requests, out-of-band verification, vendor onboarding, a multi-step verification process that involves a physical mailing address or a known verified phone number that was established months ago. You have to break the urgency. Social engineering relies on speed and the bypass of critical thinking. If you can force the attacker into a slow, multi-day process, they will often move on to an easier target. They are looking for the path of least resistance.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about the OSINT side of things? How do we address the fact that we are all walking around with digital targets on our backs because of our public data footprints? We can't all just delete LinkedIn and disappear.
That is a tougher one, but it starts with organizational data hygiene. Companies need to be much more careful about what they post in job descriptions. Do you really need to list the specific version of your firewall and your internal database naming conventions in a public LinkedIn post? Probably not. You can say you use cloud-native security tools without giving the specific brand and version. And employees need to be educated on how their public profiles can be used to map the company's hierarchy. It is not about telling people they cannot use social media, it is about making them aware that their list of colleagues is a target list for an attacker.
It is almost like we need a counter OSINT strategy. Companies should be auditing their own public-facing data the same way an attacker would. If I can find out who your network admins are, what their pets' names are, and what they like to talk about on Reddit in 5 minutes, then you have an OSINT problem. You are basically providing a dossier for the attacker.
And that leads into the whole zero trust architecture discussion. Everyone loves to use that buzzword in 2026, but most people think of it in purely technical terms. They think it means microsegmentation of the network or identity-based access control, and those are important. But a true zero trust model has to include the human element. It means you do not trust a request just because it comes from a trusted account. You verify the request itself, regardless of the sender.
Right. Because, as we said, once an account is compromised, the attacker is acting from within that circle of trust. If your system assumes that any request from the CEO's email is legitimate, you are not practicing zero trust. You are practicing absolute trust with a digital wrapper, and that wrapper is very easy to tear off once you have the credentials.
That is a great way to put it. Absolute trust with a digital wrapper. We see this a lot in what we call the vendor onboarding scam. This is a brilliant long con that we have seen spike recently. An attacker finds out who a company's major vendors are. They might do this by looking at public contracts, shipping manifests, or even just watching who makes deliveries to the office. Then they compromise a mid-level employee at the vendor company, not the target company. They do not do anything right away. They just sit and watch.
They are looking for the flow of invoices. They are learning the rhythm of the business.
They wait for a real invoice to be sent. Then they intercept it or send a follow-up email from the compromised account saying, "Hey, we are updating our banking information for the new fiscal year. Please send all future payments to this new account." Because it is coming from a real person at a real vendor that the company has a long-standing relationship with, it bypasses almost all the traditional red flags. There are no typos. The email address is correct. The timing is perfect. It is a legitimate business process that has been hijacked.
And if the company does not have an out-of-band process to verify that change in banking info, like calling the vendor's finance department on a known landline number, they might send millions of dollars to the attacker before they even realize anything is wrong. By the time the real vendor calls 30 days later to ask why they haven't been paid, the money is long gone, moved through a series of shell companies and cryptocurrency tumblers.
It is a perfect example of why social engineering is a business process. The attacker is essentially acting as a fraudulent middleman in the supply chain. They are not hacking the company, they are hacking the relationship between the company and its vendor. They are exploiting the trust that has been built over years.
This really highlights why the focus on tools like the Social Engineering Toolkit in Kali Linux is so misplaced for high-level defense. Those tools are great for a quick penetration test or a simple phishing simulation to check a compliance box, but they do not account for the patience and the research that goes into these high-level attacks. If you are only defending against what a script can do, you are leaving the door wide open for what a dedicated human with a budget and a goal can do.
It is the difference between a smash and grab and a sophisticated art heist. The smash and grab is loud and fast, and you can defend against it with a good alarm system. But the art heist involves someone getting a job as a security guard, learning the patrol routes, and slowly replacing the real painting with a fake over the course of months. You cannot defend against that with just an alarm. You need a systemic approach to security that assumes internal threats and social manipulation are always a possibility. You need to verify the painting, not just the person holding the keys to the gallery.
So, let us talk about the role of the security professional in this. If you are a Chief Information Security Officer or a network admin listening to this in March of 2026, what is your takeaway? Is it just that everything is hopeless because humans are inherently gullible?
Not at all. The takeaway is that your job is not just to manage firewalls and update patches, it is to manage trust. You have to be the architect of the trust model in your organization. That means working with human resources to ensure onboarding and offboarding processes are secure. It means working with the finance department to build those out-of-band verification steps for wire transfers. It means creating a culture where it is not only okay to question a request from a superior, but it is expected and rewarded.
That cultural shift is probably the hardest part. In a lot of organizations, especially traditional ones with rigid hierarchies, questioning the boss is seen as a sign of disrespect or incompetence. We have to flip that. We have to make it so that the boss is proud of the employee for double checking. We need to normalize the phrase, "I'm sure this is you, but I have to follow the protocol."
I tell people all the time, if your CEO is not willing to be inconvenienced for 30 seconds to verify a high-value request, then your CEO is a security liability. It has to come from the top. If the leadership does not follow the protocols because they think they are too busy or too important, no one else will. Security is a shared responsibility, but it is led by example.
It is like that old saying, the fish rots from the head. If the leadership bypasses security for convenience, they are sending a clear message that security is optional. And social engineers are experts at finding those people who think the rules do not apply to them. They look for the executives who demand exceptions to MFA because it is annoying.
They really are. In fact, they often target those very people because they know they are the ones who can override the system. It is the ultimate irony. The people with the most power in an organization are often the most vulnerable to social engineering because they have the authority to bypass the very protections designed to keep the organization safe. They are the single point of failure.
We have covered a lot of ground here, Herman. We have moved from OSINT and mapping organizational hierarchies to the psychology of authority and urgency, and even into the future of AI-driven deception. It feels like the main theme is that social engineering is not a technical problem. It is a structural one. It is a flaw in the way we organize our work and our trust.
That is the core of it. If we keep treating it like a series of unfortunate accidents or user errors, we are never going to solve it. We have to treat it as a persistent, evolving threat that requires a structural response. We need to build systems that are resilient to human fallibility, rather than systems that depend on human perfection. We need to design for the human as they are, not as we wish they were.
And that brings us to the practical takeaways for our listeners. We always like to give people something they can actually do with this information when they get back to the office.
Right. Number one, implement out-of-band verification for everything sensitive. I do not care if it is a password reset, a change in banking info, or a request for sensitive data. If the request comes in via email, verify it via phone call to a known number. If it comes in via phone call, verify it via a secure internal messaging system. Break the channel, always.
Number 2. Shift from awareness to process. Stop worrying about whether your employees can spot a typo in a phishing email and start building processes that make those emails irrelevant. If the process requires 3 steps that an attacker cannot spoof, the email becomes harmless noise. Focus on the workflow, not the warning signs.
Number 3, audit your organization's public footprint. Look at your job postings, your employees' LinkedIn profiles, and your public GitHub repositories through the eyes of an attacker. What are you telling the world about your internal systems and your organizational structure? If you are giving away the blueprint, do not be surprised when someone tries to walk through the door.
And I would add, number 4, create a culture of verification. Make it a point of pride in your company to double-check. Reward people for catching anomalies, even if it turns out to be a false alarm. You want your employees to be your first line of defense, not your weakest link. A skeptical employee is a secure employee.
That is a great list, Korn. And it really moves the needle from being a victim to being a hard target. Attackers are looking for the path of least resistance. If your organization is a thicket of processes and verifications, they are going to go find someone else who is still relying on a single push notification and a prayer. It is about making the cost of the attack higher than the potential reward.
It is about raising the cost of the attack. You are never going to make it impossible. If a nation-state wants to get in, they probably will. But you can make it so expensive and time-consuming that it is no longer profitable for the average criminal group.
It is a business after all. If the return on investment for a social engineering attack drops because you have implemented these processes, the attackers will move on to easier prey. They have quotas and margins just like any other business.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. I think it really reframes the whole conversation around social engineering. It is not just about being smart, it is about being systematic. It is about understanding that our social nature is a protocol that can be hacked just like any other.
And if you found this interesting, you should definitely check out some of our other episodes. We mentioned episode 958 about the flaws in two-factor authentication, which is a perfect companion to this discussion on MFA fatigue. And episode 593 on AI deception covers the more technical side of how these personas are being built today using large language models.
We also have episode 1008, which talks about the geo-blocking fallacy. That is relevant because social engineers often use residential proxy networks to make their attacks look like they are coming from within your own city, or even your own office building. It is all part of that same effort to build a believable persona and bypass technical filters.
And for those of you interested in the physical side of things, episode 1318, which we just did recently, covers the analog hole. It is a great look at how all the digital security in the world cannot protect you if someone can just look at your screen or hear your conversation in a coffee shop.
We have a huge archive of these topics at myweirdprompts.com. You can search for anything from battery chemistry to geopolitics. And if you have a topic you want us to dive into, there is a contact form there too. We love getting these prompts from Daniel, but we also love hearing from our listeners all over the world.
Speaking of listeners, if you have been enjoying the show, we would really appreciate a quick review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find the show and keeps us motivated to keep digging into these weird and wonderful topics. We are a small team, and every review counts.
It really does. And if you want to stay up to date, you can find our RSS feed on the website or search for My Weird Prompts on Telegram. We post every time a new episode drops, and we often share extra resources and reading materials there.
All right, I think that just about covers it for today. Any final thoughts, Corn, before we sign off?
Just that if you think you are too smart to be socially engineered, you are probably the person the attackers are looking for. Confidence is the social engineer's best friend. Stay curious, but stay skeptical.
Well said. This has been My Weird Prompts. I am Herman Poppleberry.
And I am Corn. Thanks for listening, everyone. We will talk to you next time.
Take care, everyone. See you in the next one.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird